The 72-year-old fisherman was mending his nets when the roar of an imported car shattered the morning peace. "Your time is up, stubborn old man," shouted the suited man, violently shoving Roberto against the boat. "This beach will be mine." What the arrogant businessman didn't see was Diana, the fisherman's golden dog, watching everything with eyes that seemed to understand more than any animal should. Suddenly, she began digging frantically in the sand. What Diana was about to unearth would change everything. And when the businessman discovered who that humble fisherman really was, the truth would leave him completely destroyed. Science, before we bring this exciting story of courage, tradition, and redemption to life, we want to invite you to be part of our community of people who love good stories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive more inspiring tales, like this one. The salty aroma of the sea drifted into the small faded blue cabin, mixing with the smell of the strong coffee Ethan brewed every morning before sunrise. His calloused hands, marked by decades of work on the sea, held the enamel mug as he watched the horizon begin to lighten through the window. Daisy, his faithful golden retriever, slept curled up next to the wood-burning stove, her golden fur shining softly in the faint lamplight. At 72, Ethan had kept the same routine for over half a century. He woke up before the rooster crowed, made his bitter coffee, checked the fishing nets, and headed out to sea, while the first stars still twinkled in the sky. It was a sacred ritual, inherited from his father and his father's father, a tradition that was lost in the mists of time. The village of St. Clair slept silently, its colorful houses scattered along the slope that gently descended to the beach. The sound of waves crashing on the sand was the only music in those quiet hours, a constant rhythm that lulled the dreams of the fishermen and their families. Ethan finished his coffee and placed the mug in the stone sink. His eyes, blue as the cool sea on a calm day, surveyed the simple interior of his home. Old photos in wooden frames adorned the whitewashed walls, portraits of his late wife, Mary, of his daughter who had moved to the big city, of his grandchildren, whom he only saw at Christmas. A lifetime summarized in images faded by time. Daisy lifted her head, her brown eyes attentive to her owner's movements. She was a special dog. Ethan had always known that. Since she was a puppy, she showed an unusual intelligence, a capacity for understanding that went beyond what was expected for an animal. Sometimes Ethan had the feeling that she understood his words, his thoughts, his worries. "Let's go, girl," he said softly, stroking the dog's head. "We have work to do." The fisherman picked up his worn straw hat, hanging on the hook next to the door, and stepped out into the cool morning air. The sky was beginning to tinge pink and orange on the horizon, promising a clear day. Ethan walked along the sandy path that led to the beach, Daisy trotting happily beside him. His boat, the Mary of the Sea, named after his wife, waited anchored at the small wooden pier. It was a modest vessel, painted blue and white, with the hull showing signs of years of constant use. But it was sturdy, reliable, and Ethan knew every board, every nail, every patch as if they were part of his own body. As he prepared the nets, his fingers working with the precision of decades of experience, Ethan heard a strange sound. It wasn't the familiar sound of seagulls or the crashing of waves. It was something mechanical, aggressive, disturbing the morning peace. A black SUV, shiny and completely out of place in that rustic setting, appeared on the dirt road leading to the beach. The vehicle stopped abruptly, kicking up a cloud of dust that made Ethan cough. The driver's door opened violently, and from it stepped a man who seemed to have come from another world. Tall, wearing an impeccable grey suit that probably cost more than Ethan earned in a year, the man walked with determined steps across the sand. His Italian shoes sank awkwardly into the soft ground, but he didn't seem to mind. There was something predatory in his posture, something that made Daisy growl softly, the fur on the back of her neck bristling. "You must be Ethan Stevens," the man said, his voice carrying the arrogance of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "My name is Arthur Davis. I've come to talk business." Ethan straightened his back, his hands still holding the net. There was something in the man's tone that put him on alert, a gut feeling that decades at sea had taught him not to ignore. "I have no business with anyone, sir," Ethan replied calmly. "I'm just a fisherman." Arthur laughed, a humorless sound that echoed across the deserted beach. Everyone has a price, old man. Everyone has something they want to sell. The businessman took a step forward, invading Ethan's personal space. His dark eyes examined the fisherman as if he were a minor obstacle in his path. This beach, these lands, all of this will be mine soon. I'm offering you the chance to leave amicably with a generous compensation. Ethan felt his blood boil, but he remained calm. He had faced storms at sea. He had seen nature's fury in its wildest form. So a man in a suit wouldn't intimidate him. As I said, Mr. Davis, I have nothing to sell. This is my home, my family's home for generations. Arthur's face darkened. In a sudden movement, he shoved Ethan hard, making the elderly man lose his balance and fall against the hull of the boat. Pain exploded in his back, but Ethan remained standing, clinging to the vessel. "Listen carefully, you stubborn old man," Arthur hissed, pressing Ethan against the boat. "I always get what I want. Always. You can make things easy, or we can do it the hard way." Daisy barked furiously, lunging towards the aggressor. Arthur kicked sand in the dog's direction, making her momentarily retreat. "Your time on this piece of paradise is over," the businessman shouted, deliberately stepping on the net Ethan had just finished mending. "You have 1 week to accept my offer. After that..." He let the threat hang in the air. Ethan watched in silence as Arthur walked back to his car, leaving deep prints of his expensive shoes in the sand. The engine roared as the vehicle reversed and disappeared down the road, leaving only a cloud of dust and a bitter taste in the air. Daisy cautiously approached, licking Ethan's hand in a gesture of comfort. The fisherman stroked the dog's head, his eyes still fixed on the spot where the car had disappeared. "Looks like we have trouble, girl," he murmured. "Big trouble." The rising sun painted the sky gold, but for the first time in many years, Ethan felt no peace contemplating the dawn. A shadow had fallen over St. Clair, and he had the feeling that things would never be the same again. Slowly, Ethan began to gather his damaged net. Every movement sent sharp pains through his back, reminding him of the violent confrontation. But there was something deeper than the physical pain. It was the affront to his dignity, his way of life, his history. As he worked, Ethan noticed something peculiar. Daisy was no longer by his side. The dog had moved a few yards away and was frantically digging in a specific spot on the beach, her movements urgent and determined. "Daisy, what is it?" Ethan approached, curious about the animal's unusual behavior. The dog stopped digging for a moment, looked at Ethan with her intelligent eyes, and returned to work with renewed vigor. It was as if she was trying to communicate something important, something Ethan still couldn't understand. The fisherman knelt beside Daisy, ignoring the protest of his joints. With his hands, he began to help the dog dig. The sand was damp and packed, but little by little they deepened the hole. "What did you find, girl?" Ethan asked, more to himself than to the dog. It was then that his fingers touched something hard, different from the texture of the sand. Carefully, Ethan began to clean the object, revealing what appeared to be a piece of ancient pottery, decorated with patterns he had never seen before. Daisy barked excitedly, her tail wagging with enthusiasm. Ethan examined the fragment in the light of the rising sun. There was something about those designs, something that suggested a history much older than the village of St. Clair. "Well, well," Ethan murmured, carefully tucking the fragment into his pocket. "Looks like you found something interesting, Daisy." The fisherman got up with difficulty, his back still sore from the confrontation. He looked around the familiar beach, seeing it with new eyes. How many secrets were buried beneath that sand that he walked on every day? The sound of approaching voices interrupted his thoughts. Some fishermen from the village were walking along the beach, carrying their nets and equipment. They were familiar faces, men Ethan had known for decades. "Morning, Ethan," shouted Joe, a burly fisherman with a graying beard. "See that strange car earlier? Almost ran me off the road." Ethan nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, I saw it, Joe. City folks always in a hurry." The other fishermen approached, and Ethan noticed the concern on their faces. Pete, the youngest of the group, was the first to speak. "Ethan, there are some rumors going around the village. They say there are big shots wanting to buy everything around here. Build a resort or something. Ethan sighed. News traveled fast in St. Clair. He considered telling them about the confrontation with Arthur, but decided to wait. He didn't want to alarm his friends unnecessarily. Rumors, Pete. There's always someone wanting to change things around here, but St. Clair has survived a lot. Joe scratched his beard, his piercing eyes studying Ethan. You okay? You look a little down? Just getting old, Joe. Nothing the sea can't cure. The fisherman accepted the explanation, but Ethan could see the doubt in their eyes. They knew each other too well to be easily fooled. As the men dispersed to their own boats, Ethan stood on the beach watching the familiar morning activity. Daisy had returned to his side, sitting quietly but alert. The pottery fragment weighed in his pocket like a reminder that not everything was as it seemed. Ethan had the strange feeling that this small piece of ancient clay was important, perhaps crucial to what was to come. He looked at the horizon, where the sun now shone brightly over the blue waters. Somewhere out there in the vast ocean, the ocean currents followed their mysterious paths, carrying secrets from ages past. Afternoon fell gently over St. Clair when Ethan finally returned from the sea. His catch had been modest, a few bass and a good-sized grouper, but his mind was elsewhere. The pottery fragment in his pocket seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, as if it carried untold stories. Daisy waited faithfully at the pier, her tail wagging as she spotted the boat approaching. Ethan noticed that she didn't look away from the direction where they had found the artifact that morning, as if guarding a secret only she understood. Good girl, Ethan said as he tied up the boat, stroking her golden head. Let's go home, we have company waiting. He could see his granddaughter Sarah sitting on the porch of the cabin, her dark hair pulled back in a loose bun, her eyes fixed on a laptop. Even from a distance, Ethan recognized the concentrated posture she had inherited from her grandmother. Eyebrows furrowed, shoulders slightly slumped, completely absorbed in her work. Grandpa! Sarah stood up when she saw him approaching, her face lighting up with a warm smile. I was getting worried. You took longer than usual today. Ethan hugged his granddaughter, smelling the soft scent of her shampoo mixed with the salty smell of the sea that always accompanied her since she had returned to St. Clair. The sea has its own schedule, my child, you know that. Sarah studied her grandfather's face, her keen eyes noticing something different. Did something happen? You seem troubled. Before Ethan could answer, Daisy barked urgently, running a few steps towards the beach and back, clearly wanting to show him something. What is it, Daisy? Sarah asked, intrigued by the animal's behavior. Ethan sighed, knowing he couldn't hide anything from his observant granddaughter. He took the pottery fragment from his pocket, holding it out to Sarah. Daisy found this morning. It was buried on the beach, near the pier. Sarah's eyes widened as she examined the object. As a marine biologist, she was used to finding all kinds of things on the beaches, but this was different. Grandpa, this looks ancient. Very ancient. She turned the fragment against the light. These patterns, I've never seen anything like this. We might be talking about something pre-colonial. Ethan told her about Daisy's strange behavior, how the dog had dug with determination in a specific spot. But he still hesitated to mention the confrontation with Arthur. There's something else, Sarah said softly, touching her grandfather's arm. I know you. What happened? It was then that Ethan recounted the morning's encounter. The words came out slowly, heavy with worry. Sarah listened in silence, her expression hardening with each detail. That, she began, but stopped herself. Grandpa, you need to report this. It's assault, intimidation. No, Sarah. Ethan shook his head. I don't want trouble. Men like this Arthur have power, influence. It's better to let it go. Sarah stood up abruptly, the fire of indignation in her eyes. Let it go. Grandpa, he assaulted you. And this resort story is going to destroy everything here. Daisy approached Sarah, nudging her leg with her nose in a comforting gesture. The young woman distractedly stroked the animal's head, while her mind worked quickly. Listen, she finally said, I'm going to do some research. About this Arthur Davis, about property rights, about everything. And this fragment, she examined the pottery again. I have a colleague at the university's archaeology museum. I can ask him to take a look. Ethan smiled sadly. You're as stubborn as your grandmother. And you're as stubborn as, well, as yourself, Sarah retorted, returning the smile. They entered the house, the familiar aroma of coffee and sea enveloping them. Ethan prepared a simple meal with the catch of the day while Sarah worked on her laptop, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Interesting, she murmured after a few minutes. Arthur Davis, CEO of Davis Real Estate Development, several large projects along the coast, and she paused, frowning. Grandpa, look at this. Ethan approached, looking over his granddaughter's shoulder. On the screen was an old photo, black and white, showing a group of fishermen. The caption read, St. Clair Fisherman, 1965. This one here, Sarah pointed to a boy in the corner of the photo. Doesn't he look like someone? Ethan adjusted his reading glasses, examining the image. There was something familiar about the boy's features, something in his eyes. My God, he whispered. It's little Artie, young Arthur Davis, son of Joe. Davis and Mrs. Carmen. Sarah's eyes widened. You know him? I did. The family left when he was about 5 or 6. His father got a job in the city. They moved. I never heard from them again. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Daisy, lying at Ethan's feet, lifted her head as if sensing the change in atmosphere. So he's from here, Sarah said slowly. He grew up here. He knows this place. And now he wants to destroy everything, Ethan completed, bitterness evident in his voice. The sun was setting outside, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. It was the magic hour, when the sea seemed to merge with the sky in an infinite embrace. Ethan had always loved this time of day, but now there was a shadow over his appreciation. Sarah closed her laptop and took her grandfather's hand. Shall we go for a walk like old times? Ethan smiled, remembering when Sarah was little and spent her summers in St. Clair. They would walk along the beach at sunset, looking for shells and listening to the whisper of the waves. Daisy immediately got up, ready for the walk. The three left the house, walking slowly across the sand, still warm from the day. You know, Sarah began, breaking the comfortable silence, when I was in college, studying marine biology, people always asked me why I chose that field, and I always thought of you, of these walks, of the stories you told me about the sea. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. Your grandmother would be proud. She is, Sarah said softly. I feel her presence here, in every wave, in every breeze. They reached the spot where Daisy had found the pottery fragment. The dog began to sniff the ground again, but this time without the urgency of the morning. What do you think is under here? Sarah asked, kneeling on the sand. Ethan watched his granddaughter examine the area with a scientist's eyes. There was something comforting about seeing her there, connected to the land of her ancestors, even with all her modern education. Grandpa, Sarah suddenly said, do you remember any stories about the native people who lived here, before colonization? Ethan frowned, searching his memories. My father used to tell stories, said the old fishermen sometimes found strange things in their nets, pottery, stone tools, but no one paid much attention. What if... Sarah paused, her mind clearly working on a theory. What if this place is more important than we think? A significant archaeological site could change everything. Legally, I mean, Daisy barked as if agreeing with the idea. Ethan ran his hand over the dog's head, thoughtful. You think that... I think we need to investigate further, Sarah interrupted, carefully, documenting everything. If there really is an archaeological site here, no resort can be built. The sky darkened quickly, the first stars appearing in the firmament. The distant lighthouse began its nightly vigil, its beams sweeping across the dark waters. As they walked back home, Ethan felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. Things were becoming more complicated than he had imagined. It was no longer just about an old fisherman defending his home. There was history, memory, heritage at stake. Tomorrow I'm going to the university, Sarah said as they approached the cabin. First, I'll talk to my archaeology colleague, show him the fragment, and I'll research more about your legal rights to the property. Ethan nodded, grateful for his granddaughter's support. Be careful, my child. Men like Arthur don't like obstacles. I know how to handle sharks, Grandpa, Sarah said with a mischievous smile. in the sea and on land. That night, as Ethan prepared for bed, Daisy remained restless. The dog paced back and forth, occasionally stopping to look out the window towards the sea. "What is it, girl?" Ethan asked, stroking the animal's head. "Do you sense something coming?" Daisy looked at him with her intelligent eyes, and Ethan again had that strange feeling that she understood more than she should. There was a storm brewing, not in the sky, but in the quiet lives of St. Clair. Lying in his simple bed, listening to the constant rhythm of the waves, Ethan thought about Arthur, the boy who had once run barefoot on the same beach, who had fished in the same spots, who had breathed the same salty air. What had happened to turn him into someone capable of destroying all of this? The traditional St. Clair Seafood Festival transformed the small village into a whirlwind of colors, music, and aromas. Colorful flags fluttered between the posts. Boats decorated with flowers lined the beach, and the sound of Old Man Johnson's accordion echoed through the narrow streets. It was the most important day of the year for the fishing community, when they thanked the sea for its bounty and asked for protection for the following year. Ethan adjusted his best shirt, a white guayabera that Mary had sewn 20 years ago, as he watched the activity through the window. Daisy was particularly restless, her ears alert to every sound, as if she sensed that this would not be an ordinary day. Sarah arrived early, wearing a floral dress that made her look even more like her grandmother. She carried a folder under her arm and an expression that mixed enthusiasm and worry. "Grandpa, I have news," she said as soon as she entered. "My archaeology colleague was fascinated with the fragment. He wants to come here to do a preliminary assessment of the site." Ethan poured coffee for his granddaughter, noticing her hands were slightly trembling. "And the research on Arthur. That's what's interesting." Sarah opened the folder, revealing documents and photographs. "I found old records at the town hall. The Davis family really lived here, but there's more. His father, Joe Davis, lost his boat in a storm in 1963. That's when the financial difficulties that led them to leave St. Clair began." Ethan sat down heavily, the coffee cup forgotten in his hands. He vaguely remembered the incident, a sudden storm that caught several fishermen by surprise. Some didn't come home that day. "Joe Davis," he murmured. "Yes, I remember. He was a good man, hardworking. Losing the boat was devastating for the family." "There's more," Sarah continued. "In the purchase and sale records, I discovered that the land where our house stands originally belonged to the Davis family. Your grandfather bought it directly from Joe Davis before they left." Silence hung heavy in the small kitchen. Daisy approached, resting her head on Ethan's lap as if offering comfort. "So that's it," Ethan said finally. "He doesn't just want to build a resort. He wants back what he considers his." Sarah took her grandfather's hand. "But the sale was legal." "Grandpa, I have all the documents. He has no right to this land." A loud crash outside made them jump. Through the window, they saw Arthur's black SUV parked rudely in the middle of the narrow street, blocking the passage of residents heading to the festival. The businessman got out of the car, this time accompanied by two men in dark suits. "Stay inside," Ethan said, getting up. "No way," Sarah retorted, following her grandfather. Daisy growled softly, positioning herself protectively beside them. Outside, the music had stopped. Residents watched with apprehension as Arthur and his companions walked down the street. The contrast between their business suits and the festive clothes of the fishermen was stark. "Ethan Stevens," Arthur called out, his voice cutting through the festive air like a knife. "We need to talk." Ethan stepped forward, Sarah beside him. "Today is a day of celebration, Mr. Davis. A sacred day. For us fishermen. Respect that," Arthur laughed dryly. "Sacred? You and your primitive superstitions. That's why this place never progresses." A murmur of indignation ran through the growing crowd. Joe, Ethan's fisherman friend, stepped forward, but Ethan raised his hand, asking for calm. "I know who you... Tell young Arthur," Ethan said calmly. "I know you grew up here, that your father was one of us." For a moment, something flickered across Arthur's face, a shadow of emotion quickly suppressed. "That was a long time ago. I've changed, I've evolved." "Changed so much you forgot where you came from?" Sarah's voice cut through the air. "Forgot the people who helped your family when you needed them most?" Arthur glared at Sarah with cold eyes. "And who are you?" "Sarah Stevens, Ethan's granddaughter, marine biologist, and defender of St. Clair's natural and cultural heritage." "Ah, the intellectual granddaughter. Came back from the big city to save the poor, ignorant fisherman?" Before Sarah could answer, Daisy stepped forward, positioning herself between them and Arthur. The dog didn't growl or bark. She just stood there, a golden and imposing presence that somehow changed the dynamic of the confrontation. It was at that moment that old Mrs. Carman, the village baker, emerged from the crowd. She was a robust woman in her 70s, known for her sharp tongue and generous heart. "Young Arthur Davis," she said, her voice filled with maternal authority. "I knew your mother. Carmen was my friend. A good woman, hard-working. What would she say if she saw you now threatening your old neighbors?" Arthur seemed to hesitate for a moment, but quickly regained his composure. "Times change, Mrs. Carman. This place needs to modernize." "Modernize by destroying our homes, our traditions." Joe had joined the group, followed by other fishermen. "We've lived off the sea for generations. It's our livelihood, our life." "Exactly," Arthur exploded. "You're stuck in the past. I'm offering the future. Jobs at the resort, development, money coming into the local economy." "Jobs doing what?" Sarah challenged. "Serving drinks to rich tourists? Cleaning hotel rooms? While our culture, our way of life is destroyed?" The argument was escalating when a weak but clear voice rose above the commotion. "Water." Ethan turned to see Father Michael, the elderly village priest, leaning on his cane. The priest was pale, sweat dripping down his face. "Father, are you okay?" Ethan rushed to support him. "My medicine, I forgot to take it, my pressure." Sarah immediately took control. "Someone call an ambulance. Grandpa, help me get him to the shade. Mrs. Carman, water, please." In the midst of the confusion, Arthur and his men took a step back. For a moment, Ethan saw uncertainty in the businessman's eyes, perhaps even genuine concern. While they were tending to Father Michael, Ethan couldn't help but notice Daisy's peculiar behavior. The dog had moved away from the group and was frantically digging in a flower bed near the church. "Daisy, not now," Ethan called, but the dog ignored him, her urgency palpable. Suddenly, Daisy barked triumphantly. She had unearthed something, another pottery fragment larger than the first with more elaborate patterns. Sarah, who was monitoring the priest's vital signs, looked up. "Grandpa, she found another one," the small crowd murmured excitedly. Even Arthur seemed intrigued, approaching cautiously. "What is that?" he asked, his voice temporarily losing its aggressive tone. Ethan picked up the fragment, examining it in the sunlight. "Looks like it's from the same source as the other one." "Daisy has been finding these pieces. They're native artifacts," Sarah explained, still tending to the priest who was starting to recover. "Possibly from an important archaeological site." Arthur frowned. "So what? What does that have to do with—" "It has everything to do with it," Sarah interrupted. "If confirmed as an archaeological site, the entire area is protected by law. No construction can be done here." The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan could see the gears turning in Arthur's head, calculating, planning. "We'll see about that," the businessman said finally, his voice low and threatening. "My lawyers—" "Arthur!" The weak voice of Father Michael interrupted. The priest had regained some color, supported by Sarah and Mrs. Carman's arms. "Father," Arthur seemed uncomfortable for the first time. "I baptized you, my boy. I remember the day. Your mother cried with joy." The priest coughed lightly. "She had so many dreams for you. She wanted you to be someone important, yes, but also good. Just—" Arthur looked away. "Dreams sometimes take unexpected turns, Father." "Yes," the priest agreed, "but it's never too late to correct them." The ambulance arrived, interrupting the moment. As the paramedics took care of Father Michael, the seafood festival continued, although with a different energy, more cautious, more watchful. Arthur walked back to his car, his steps less confident than before. Before getting into the vehicle, he looked back one last time. His eyes met Ethan's, and for a brief instant, the old fisherman saw not the arrogant businessman, but the scared boy who had left St. Clair so many years ago. "This isn't over," Arthur said, but there was less venom in his words. As the SUV disappeared down the narrow street, Ethan felt Sarah hug him. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" "I am, my child. Just thinking. Sometimes life takes strange turns. Little Artie, who used to fish with me sometimes, now wanting to destroy all this." Daisy approached, still carrying dirt on her paws from digging so much. Ethan stroked her head, marveling at the animal's instinct. "What are you trying to show, us, girl?" he asked softly. The dog looked at him with those intelligent eyes, then turned her gaze to the sea. Ethan followed her gaze and noticed something that had escaped his attention before. The tide was unusually low for that time of day, revealing parts of the reef that were normally submerged. "Sarah," he called, "look at the tide." His granddaughter, ever the scientist, immediately noticed the anomaly. "That's not normal. It could be a change in the currents. Or something more," Ethan completed, remembering his father's words about the secrets the sea sometimes revealed. The festival continued through the afternoon, but there was an undercurrent of tension. Residents gathered in small groups, discussing the day's events. The discovery of more artifacts had given hope, but everyone knew that men like Arthur Davis didn't give up easily. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with fiery tones, Ethan, Sarah, and Daisy walked to the beach. The tide remained abnormally low, exposing algae-covered rocks and small pools where crabs scurried frantically. "Grandpa," Sarah said suddenly, "there, do you see it?" Ethan followed his granddaughter's gaze. Among the exposed rocks, something gleamed, not with the natural sparkle of water, but with a different artificial tone. Daisy was already running in that direction, her excited barks echoing across the beach. Ethan and Sarah followed her, carefully navigating the slippery rocks. What they found left them speechless. Partially buried in the sand among the rocks was what appeared to be a structure, not natural, definitely made by human hands. The same patterns from the pottery fragments were visible on the eroded stone. "My God," Sarah whispered. "Grandpa, this is huge. It could be the most important archaeological discovery in the region." Ethan knelt, reverently touching the ancient stone. How many secrets did St. Clair hold beneath its calm waters? Daisy barked again, but this time it wasn't excitement, it was a warning. Ethan raised his head and saw figures approaching along the beach. Arthur had returned, this time with more men. "Looks like our friend doesn't give up easily," Ethan said, helping Sarah to stand up. "Let me handle this, Grandpa." "No, together." They waited on the beach as Arthur and his men approached. The businessman had changed out of his suit into more casual clothes, but the determination in his eyes remained. "I heard about your discoveries," he said without preamble. "I've come to make a proposal." Ethan and Sarah exchanged cautious glances. Daisy growled softly. "I'm listening," Ethan said. "We can work together, preserve the archaeological site, create a museum, integrate this into the resort. Cultural tourism. Everyone wins." "Or," Sarah counter-proposed, "we can preserve the site and the village as they are. Develop sustainable tourism that respects our culture and traditions." Arthur smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. "You don't understand. I'm not asking. I'm being courteous by making an offer." "Are you threatening us?" Ethan asked calmly. "I'm being realistic. I have resources, influence, you have—" "What, an old fisherman, an idealistic biologist, and a smart dog?" It was Daisy who responded. With a sudden movement, she grabbed something from one of Arthur's men's bags, a document that fell onto the sand. Sarah quickly picked it up before they could react. "What is this?" she asked, her eyes quickly scanning the paper. Her expression changed. "These are eviction notices. You were already preparing this even before—" "It's business, Miss Stevens, nothing personal." "Nothing personal?" Ethan felt his anger flare. "You grew up here, Arthur. You swam in these waters. You fished with me and my father. How can you say it's not personal?" For a moment, Arthur's mask cracked. Ethan saw a glimpse of the boy he had known, confused, lost, trying to prove something to someone, perhaps to himself. "Precisely because I grew up here," Arthur said, his voice filled with repressed emotion. "I know what it's like to live in poverty, to see my father break his back every day for scraps. I swore I would never go through that again. that I would come back and show everyone that I could be more." "And that's how you show it?" Sarah asked softly. "By destroying the place that made you who you are?" Arthur turned abruptly. "You have 1 week. Think about my proposal, or face the consequences." As they walked away, Ethan felt the weight of the years on his shoulders. The fight was just beginning, and he wasn't sure if he would have the strength to win it. "Grandpa," Sarah held his arm, "we'll fight. The whole community will fight." Ethan looked at the sea, where the first stars were beginning to appear. Somewhere out there, the mysterious currents continued their eternal ballet, carrying secrets and memories. Daisy approached, rubbing against Ethan's legs. The old fisherman smiled, stroking his faithful companion. "Yes," he said finally, "we'll fight, for St. Clair, for our history, for our future." The storm arrived without warning on the 5th, night after the festival. Ethan woke up to the howling wind and the sound of shingles being ripped from roofs. Daisy stood by the window, her body tense, a low growl emanating from her throat. "Bad storm, girl," Ethan murmured, getting up to check the boat's moorings. Through the window, blurred by rain, he could see the turbulent sea, giant waves crashing furiously against the pier. His phone rang. Sarah, worried. "Grandpa, are you okay? The storm—" "I'm fine, child, but I need to check on the boat." "Don't go out now, it's too dangerous." But Ethan was already putting on his raincoat. Decades at sea had taught him that ignoring a storm was a recipe for disaster. Daisy tried to follow him, but he made her stay. "No, girl, stay here. I'll be right back." The force of the wind almost knocked him down when he opened the door. The rain fell horizontally, whipping his face like tiny needles. Ethan fought against the elements, heading towards the pier, where his boat danced violently on the waves. It was then that he saw it. 2 men struggling with the moorings of the Mary of the Sea, not to reinforce them, but to loosen them. "Hey!" Ethan shouted, but his voice was lost in the roar of the storm. The men turned, surprised. Even in the darkness and rain, Ethan recognized one of them. It was one of Arthur's thugs. The man said something to his partner, and they both abandoned the boat, running along the beach. Ethan hurried to the pier, his old knees protesting. The moorings were partially cut. A few more minutes and his boat would have been swept away by the storm, destroyed against the rocks. With fingers numb from the cold, Ethan worked frantically to reinforce the moorings. A giant wave swept over the pier, almost taking him with it. He grabbed onto a post, the salty water filling his mouth and nose. "Ethan!" Through the curtain of rain, he saw Joe and other fishermen running towards him. Sarah was with them, completely soaked, Daisy by her side. The dog had escaped from the house to get help. Together they managed to save not only the Mary of the Sea, but several other boats that the saboteurs had tried to loosen. The community worked together under the storm, men and women fighting against the fury of nature and the wickedness of men. When they finally returned to their homes, exhausted and soaked, the worst of the storm had passed. Ethan trembled uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from the adrenaline and rage. "They tried to destroy our boats," Joe said, his voice hoarse. "All of them. If Daisy hadn't raised the alarm—" Ethan stroked the heroic dog's head, who didn't leave his side. Sarah made hot tea for everyone, her hands trembling from cold and indignation. "We need to report this," she said firmly. "It's sabotage, attempted destruction of property." "And what proof do we have?" Ethan asked bitterly. "My word against his?" It was then that Pete, the younger fisherman, took something out of his pocket, a cell phone in a waterproof case. "I filmed it," he said simply. "When I saw the men on the pier, I started recording. It's all here." A hopeful silence fell over the group. Finally, they had concrete evidence. The next morning, with the sea still rough but the storm over, the consequences were visible. Broken branches, scattered shingles, debris everywhere. But the village was intact, the boat saved, the community more united than ever. Ethan was assessing the damage in his yard when Arthur appeared. The businessman was alone this time, without his usual entourage. There was something different about him, deep, dark circles under his eyes, a less arrogant posture. "I came to check the storm damage," he said, avoiding Ethan's gaze. "Check if your men finished the job," Ethan replied coldly. Arthur raised his head abruptly. "What are you talking about?" We know what you tried to do. We have proof." For a moment, Arthur seemed genuinely confused. Then, understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked like anger. "Those idiots," he murmured. "I told them to wait, not to—" "So, you admit it? It wasn't supposed to be like that." Arthur ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Yes, we planned to pressure you, make things difficult until you agreed to sell, but not during a storm, never risking lives." Ethan studied the man in front of him. "And that changes anything? You still want to destroy our homes, our way of life. I want to develop this place, bring prosperity. For whom? For the investors? For the rich tourists?" Ethan felt decades of frustration bubbling up. "What happened to you, Artie? What happened to the boy who used to fish with me?" The question hit Arthur like a slap. He staggered slightly, his eyes losing focus. "That boy," he began, his voice breaking. "That boy saw his father crying because he couldn't feed his family. He saw his mother getting sick from working too much. He stopped, swallowing hard. "Saw what?" Ethan pressed gently. "Saw you. All of you living your simple lives content with little, while my family was falling apart." The bitterness in Arthur's voice was palpable. "My father never got over losing the boat. He drank himself to death. My mother worked 3 jobs to keep me in school." The silence that followed was heavy. Daisy cautiously approached Arthur, sniffing his hand. The businessman looked at the animal, surprised. "She doesn't trust easily," Ethan observed. "Animals are better judges of character than people," Arthur said bitterly. "They see beyond appearances. Perhaps she sees something in you that you yourself have forgotten." Just then, Sarah appeared carrying a box. She stopped when she saw Arthur, her eyes narrowing. "What's he doing here?" "Talking," Ethan said simply. Sarah carefully placed the box on the ground. "Grandpa, look what the storm revealed." She opened the box, showing several pottery artifacts, all with the same intricate patterns. The erosion caused by the storm exposed more of the archaeological site. "This is just a sample of what we found this morning." Arthur approached, his curiosity overcoming his hostility. "They're beautiful." "They are history," Sarah corrected. "Our history. The history of this place you want to destroy." "I don't want to destroy," Arthur protested. "I want to build." "Build on top of what? On memories, on culture, on identity?" Ethan picked up one of the fragments, turning it against the light. "You know, Artie, your father once told me that his grandfather used to say that this land was special, that the ancient ones protected it." "Superstitions," Arthur murmured, but without conviction. "Or wisdom we don't understand," Ethan retorted. "Daisy has been showing us these artifacts. It's as if something wants them to be found now, just when someone threatens the place," Sarah completed. Arthur sat down heavily on a wooden bench. For a moment, he seemed much younger, vulnerable. "I just wanted to prove I could be someone," he said softly, "that I could come back triumphant, show that the son of the failed fisherman could be successful." "And you are," Ethan said gently, "but success doesn't have to come at the expense of others." "It's too late," Arthur whispered. "I have investors, contracts, deadlines." "It's never too late to change course," Sarah intervened. "For you yourself said yesterday, we can work together, but fairly, respecting what already exists." Arthur looked up, and Ethan saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. "How?" It was Daisy who answered in a way. The dog had found something in the yard. A small green sprout emerging from the earth turned up by the storm, exactly where she had dug days before. Sarah examined the plant with professional interest. It can't be." "What?" Ethan asked. "It seems to be a variation of that rare medicinal plant I mentioned before. If it really is, and if it grows naturally here." "The scientific value would be immense," Arthur completed, his business mind already working. "Research, development, natural pharmaceutical products. Sustainable," Sarah emphasized, "preserving the ecosystem, the community, the culture." Ethan watched as the 2 young people began to discuss possibilities. It was strange to see Sarah and Arthur on the same side, but perhaps this was what St. Clair needed. the union of the traditional with the modern, the local with the global. There are conditions, Ethan interrupted, if we're going to consider any partnership. Arthur nodded, waiting. First, the community must be an integral part of any decision. Second, our homes, our way of life must be preserved. Third, Ethan looked directly into Arthur's eyes, you need to remember who you are, where you came from. Arthur was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. I can try. Ethan shook the businessman's hand, feeling the calluses that had once marked those palms, long softened by years of air-conditioned offices. It's a start, Daisy barked, as if approving the agreement. Sarah smiled for the first time in Arthur's presence. We have a lot of work ahead of us, she said. We need to map the archaeological site, study the plant, involve the community, and prepare a proposal that satisfies my investors without destroying St. Clair, Arthur added. It will be difficult, Ethan warned. The best things always. Sir, Arthur replied, and for a moment Ethan saw the boy he had known, determined, hopeful, ready to face the world. As they discussed the next steps, the sun broke through the remaining storm clouds. The golden light bathed St. Clair, making the puddles gleam like mirrors and revealing a rainbow over the sea. Daisy walked to the edge of the yard, looking at the horizon. Ethan followed her gaze and saw that the tide was changing. The waters that had receded so dramatically were beginning to return, but in a different, gentler way. The currents have changed, Sarah observed, her voice filled with scientific and symbolic meaning. Arthur stood beside them, watching the sea he had once tried to conquer, and that he now began to understand he needed to respect. You know, he said softly, I used to have nightmares about drowning. After we left here for years, I dreamed that the sea was coming for me. The sea doesn't come for anyone, Ethan said wisely. It welcomes back those who belong to it. Arthur nodded slowly, finally understanding what Ethan meant. He belonged to St. Clair as much as the old fisherman, as much as Sarah, as much as Daisy. The difference was that it took him decades to accept it. So, Sarah broke the contemplative silence. Where do we start? Ethan smiled, feeling for the first time in days that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. We start, he said, looking at Daisy, who was now gently digging around the newly discovered plant, by trusting in the wisdom of those who came before us and in the hope of those who will come after. 2 weeks had passed since the storm, and St. Clair was buzzing with a different energy. The community center, usually used only for occasional celebrations, had become the headquarters for an ambitious project that united preservation and progress. Ethan watched the activity in the large room, where maps and documents covered makeshift tables. Sarah coordinated a team of university students who had come to document the archaeological site. Arthur, in shirt sleeves and without a tie, discussed zoning and sustainable development with community representatives. Daisy circulated among the groups, her calming presence helping to maintain harmony when discussions heated up, which happened frequently. We cannot allow construction within 300 yards of the archaeological area, insisted Professor Evans, the archaeologist Sarah had brought. 300 yards makes half the project unfeasible, Arthur counter-argued, pointing to the map. Then, change the project, Joe, the fisherman intervened. The site was here before your plans. Ethan raised his hand, asking for calm. Let's think differently. What if the site isn't an obstacle but the main attraction? Everyone turned to him. Ethan approached the table, Daisy by his side. Sarah, show them that article you found about sustainable archaeological tourism. His granddaughter quickly pulled up the document on her laptop. Here, success stories where archaeological sites became the center of economic development, respecting and preserving the heritage. Arthur studied the numbers, his business brain processing the possibilities. That could work. A visitor center, guided tours, academic research. What about the village? Mrs. Carman asked, always protective of her community. The village becomes part of the experience, Ethan suggested. Authentic, preserved, but actively participating. Family-run guest houses instead of big hotels, local restaurants offering traditional cuisine. Boat tours to see the reefs, Pete added enthusiastically. Responsible sport fishing. And the Medicinal Plant Research Center, Sarah reminded. "We can integrate everything. Archaeology, marine biology, botany." The discussion continued, but now with a more collaborative tone. Ethan discreetly withdrew, stepping outside for some air. Daisy followed him, as always. Outside, late afternoon painted the sky with shades of pink and orange. Ethan walked to a bench under an old almond tree, sitting down with a weary sigh. The past few days had been intense. "Tired, friend?" Ethan looked up to see Arthur approaching. The businessman seemed equally exhausted, but there was something different about him, a lightness that hadn't been there before. "A little," Ethan admitted, "but it's a good tired." Arthur sat beside him. Daisy, surprisingly, lay down between the two men, her head resting on her paws. "You know," Arthur began, "I spent years planning my revenge." "Revenge?" Ethan frowned. "Against this place, against the poverty, against the memories." Arthur laughed bitterly. "What an idiot I was." "You weren't an idiot. You were human. We all carry our pain." "My father," Arthur paused, swallowing hard. "Before he died, he made me promise that I would come back here one day. I thought he wanted me to show that I had succeeded in life. Now I realize that maybe he wanted me to come back home." Ethan placed a hand on the younger man's shoulder. "You came back, that's what matters." Daisy lifted her head, her ears alert. Seconds later, Sarah appeared, running excitedly. "Grandpa, Arthur, you have to see this." They followed her back into the community center, where a commotion had formed around Professor Evans's laptop. "We just got the preliminary results from the carbon dating," the professor explained, barely containing his excitement. "The artifacts are even older than we thought. We're talking about an unknown pre-Columbian civilization." "What does that mean?" Arthur asked. "It means," Sarah replied, her eyes shining, "that St. Clair could be one of the most important archaeological sites in the country. Universities from all over the world will want to study here." "What about the medicinal plant?" Ethan asked. "Even better," Sarah smiled. "Preliminary analysis shows unique properties, possibly related to the specific soil here, which in turn may be connected to the ancient settlement." Arthur looked around the room, seeing the hopeful faces of the community. "We need to completely rethink the project. This is much bigger than a resort. It's a center of excellence," Ethan suggested. "Research, education, conscious tourism, cultural preservation, and real economic development for the community," Joe added. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Arthur worked tirelessly with his lawyers and investors to restructure the project. Some investors backed out, but others, visionary ones, saw the unique potential of the proposal. Sarah coordinated the creation of a management board that included community representatives, academics, and businessmen. Ethan, despite his protests, was elected honorary chairman. Daisy continued making her discoveries. One day she led Sarah to a rocky part of the beach where no one usually went. There, hidden among the stones, was a freshwater spring, something considered impossible so close to the sea. "It's a rare geological phenomenon," Sarah explained after studying the site. "It might be connected to what makes the soil here so special." The transformation of St. Clair happened gradually, respecting the community's rhythm. The houses were restored, maintaining their original architecture. Small family-run guest houses began to welcome researchers and conscious tourists. The community center was expanded to include a small museum and research laboratories. Ethan continued, fishing, now often accompanied by Arthur, who had rediscovered the simple pleasure of being at sea. It was strange and at the same time comforting to see the businessman learning again how to cast nets and read the currents. "You know," Arthur said one of those mornings, as they collected a modest but satisfying catch, "I had forgotten how peaceful this is." "The sea teaches patience," Ethan replied, "and humility." Daisy, who now had her own reserved spot on the boat, barked in agreement. A year later, St. Clair hosted the official inauguration ceremony of the Center for Research and Cultural Preservation of Coastal Peoples. Authorities, academics, and journalists filled the main square, but the real highlight was the local residents, dressed in their best clothes, proud of their village. Ethan, uncomfortable in his new suit, spoke as chairman of the board. St. Clair has always been special. Our ancestors knew it, the ancient peoples who lived here knew it. For a while, some of us forgot. But the land has ways of reminding us what really matters. He paused, his eyes finding Arthur's in the front row. Sometimes we need to leave to be able to come back. We need to get lost to find ourselves. Today, we celebrate not just a research center or a development project. We celebrate the reunion of people, of stories, of possible futures. Daisy, sitting at Ethan's feet on the stage, got up and walked to the edge. For a moment it seemed as if she wanted to speak too. Instead, she barked once, clear and strong, making everyone laugh. As Daisy reminds us, Ethan continued smiling, the best discoveries often come from the most unexpected places, and the best guides aren't always human. After the ceremony, as people mingled at the reception, Ethan found a moment of quiet on the old pier. The Mary of the Sea swayed gently on the waves, now accompanied by research boats and tourist vessels, all coexisting harmoniously. Sarah joined him, linking her arm through his. Proud, Grandpa. Relieved, Ethan corrected. And hopeful. You're the one who made this possible. It wasn't me, it was St. Clair, it was Daisy. It was even Arthur in his own way. We are all just currents in the same ocean. Arthur approached, now completely at ease in his simple fishing clothes. Ethan, Sarah, the investors are impressed. They want to expand the model to other coastal communities. Carefully, Ethan warned. Each place has its own soul. I know, Arthur nodded. I learned that here. But imagine, how many St. Clairs are there around the world, waiting for someone to see them for who they really are? Daisy appeared, running along the beach with something in her mouth. She dropped the object at Ethan's feet, another pottery fragment, but this one different, with what looked like a map or diagram. Sarah examined the piece with growing excitement. This could indicate there are more sites, an entire network of ancient settlements along the coast. Arthur smiled. Looks like our work is just beginning. Ethan stroked Daisy's head, marveling once again at the animal's inexplicable wisdom, looking at the horizon where the sun was beginning its daily descent into the sea. He reflected on the journey that had brought them there. A year ago, a furious man had invaded his life, threatening to destroy everything he loved. Now that same man stood beside him, not as an enemy, but as an ally, as a friend, as someone who had finally found his way back home. You know, Ethan said softly, my father always said that the sea doesn't separate lands, it connects them. I think I finally understand what he meant. As the sun set, painting the sky with the colors of fire, the four remained on the pier. The old fisherman, the young scientist, the redeemed businessman, and the wise dog. Each had played their part in the transformation of St. Clair, proving that sometimes the greatest treasures are not buried in the past, but in the ability to unite tradition and progress, memory and hope. 5 years passed like the tides, constant, but always bringing something new with each cycle. Ethan, now 77, watched the morning activity on the beach from his favorite spot under the centenary almond tree. Daisy, her muzzle gray but still alert, rested at his feet. St. Clair had transformed, but in an organic way, like a plant that grows respecting the ground where it was sown. The colorful fishermen's houses now coexisted harmoniously with discreet signs indicating family-run guest houses and small restaurants. The research center, built with architecture that blended the modern with the traditional, had become an international reference. Grandpa! Ethan smiled as he heard the familiar voice. Sarah approached running, her white researcher's coat fluttering. Even after all these years, she maintained a student's enthusiasm. Slow down, child, what happened? We just got the confirmation. She could barely contain her excitement. UNESCO is going to declare St. Clair a World Heritage Site. Ethan's eyes widened. Really? Yes. The archaeological site, the preservation of the fishing culture, the sustainable development model. They said we're an example to the world. Daisy lifted her head, as if understanding the importance of the news, and gave an approving bark. From the research center, Arthur emerged, now a transformed man. The years in St. Clair had tanned his skin, and replaced his old arrogance with a quiet confidence. He still maintained his businesses, but now focused on conscious development of coastal communities. "Ethan, hear the news," Arthur approached, with quick steps. "Sarah just told me it's an honor and a responsibility. It's the recognition of everything we've built together." Arthur sat beside his old friend. "Who would have thought, huh? The stubborn fisherman and the arrogant businessman." Ethan laughed. "Everyone changes, Artie. Some just take longer to find their way." A small group approached along the beach. Journalists, UNESCO officials, various dignitaries. But what caught Ethan's attention was a middle-aged couple walking slightly apart from the group. "That's," Sarah began. "Lucas," Ethan completed, recognizing John's son, now an adult, accompanied by his wife. The autistic boy who found peace with Daisy had become a renowned therapist, specializing in animal-assisted therapy. Lucas approached slowly, his eyes searching for and finding Daisy. The dog, even elderly, got up and walked to him, allowing him to stroke her head as he did when he was a child. "Mr. Ethan," Lucas said, his voice clear and confident, so different from the silent boy of before. "I came to thank you. Daisy, she changed my life." "Daisy changes many lives," Ethan replied, moved. The official group arrived, and the usual protocols began: photos, documents, speeches. Ethan participated in the minimum necessary, preferring to observe how his community had flourished. Joe coordinated the sustainable fishing tours, teaching tourists about local traditions. Mrs. Carmen had expanded her small bakery into a celebrated restaurant for keeping regional cuisine alive. Pete led the environmental education program for schools. The ancient archaeological site, carefully preserved and studied, had revealed extraordinary secrets about an advanced maritime civilization. The medicinal plant, scientifically named Artemisia sancta clara, was in the final phase of testing for the treatment of various neurological conditions. As the sun began to set, Ethan escaped the festivities, following a familiar path to the pier. Daisy accompanied him, her steps slower but still determined. The Mary of the Sea swayed gently in its mooring, now more a cherished relic than a daily work tool. Ethan rarely fished commercially now, but he still went out to sea on calm mornings, more out of love than necessity. Tired of the celebrations, Ethan turned to see Sarah and Arthur approaching. "A little. I prefer the quiet." They sat on the pier, their feet dangling over the water. Daisy lay down between them, her rhythmic breathing mingling with the sound of the waves. "You know," Arthur began, "sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if I had succeeded, if I had built the original resort." "You'd probably be rich and unhappy," Sarah observed. "Instead, I'm rich and happy," Arthur smiled. "Rich in ways money can't measure." Ethan watched the horizon, where the sky met the sea in an infinite embrace. "My father used to say that the sea holds all stories, the ones that have been told and the ones that still will be." "What do you think he'd say about all this?" Sarah asked. "I think he'd say that every current finds its way. Some take longer, go through more turns, but they all arrive where they're meant to arrive." Daisy suddenly lifted her head, her ears alert. The three humans followed her gaze and saw a small figure running along the beach. A girl, perhaps 6 years old, dark hair blowing in the wind. "Grandpa!" the child shouted, running towards them. Ethan smiled broadly. It was Marina, Sarah's granddaughter, who carried the name of her great-grandmother. The girl had inherited the family's scientific curiosity and love for the sea. "What is it, my little mermaid?" Ethan opened his arms to receive the tight hug. "Mommy said Daisy found something new. Can I see?" Sarah laughed. She never stops. "This morning Daisy was digging near the spring. We found more pottery, but these have different inscriptions." "Daisy still finds treasures?" Arthur marveled. "Daisy always knew where to look," Ethan stroked the dog's head. "She sees things that we humans sometimes take a long time to notice." Marina sat down beside Daisy, gently hugging the elderly animal. "Grandpa, when I grow up, I want to be like Daisy. I want to find hidden treasures and help people." "You already are like her," Ethan said softly. "Curious, kind, special." Night was falling over St. Clair, the first stars appearing in the increasingly dark sky. Lights began to turn on in the houses and in the research center, creating a terrestrial constellation that mirrored the celestial one. "We should head back," Sarah suggested. "There's still the closing ceremony." "You go ahead," Ethan said. "I want to stay a little longer." Sarah and Arthur walked away, taking Marina, who waved happily. Ethan remained on the pier with Daisy, two old companions contemplating the eternal sea. "It was a good journey, wasn't it, girl?" Ethan said softly. Daisy rested her head on his leg, her wise eyes reflecting the first stars. Ethan thought about everything that had happened, the initial confrontation with Arthur, the discovery of the artifacts, the fight to preserve St. Clair, the transformation that followed. Every moment had been necessary, every challenge a disguised opportunity. A fishing boat passed in the distance, its lights blinking in the darkness. Ethan waved, even without knowing if they could see him. It was an automatic gesture, born of decades of camaraderie at sea. "Mr. Ethan?" He turned to see Father Michael, now even more stooped but with the same gentle smile. "Father, weren't you at the ceremony?" "I came looking for you. I thought you'd be here." The priest sat down with difficulty beside Ethan. "Big changes, aren't they?" "Necessary changes. You know, I baptized Arthur. I baptized Sarah. I baptized little Marina." The priest smiled. "It's beautiful to see how lives intertwine, how stories continue." "Like the currents of the sea," Ethan agreed. "Exactly. And Daisy here." The priest stroked the dog's head. "She was the compass that guided everyone in the right direction." They were silent for a moment, three elders, man, priest, and dog, contemplating the mystery and beauty of life. "I need to go," the priest said finally. "I just wanted to say thank you." "Thank you for what?" "For protecting St. Clair, for showing that tradition and progress can walk together, for proving that even the hardest hearts can change." After the priest left, Ethan stayed a little longer. The music from the festival reached him, carried by the night breeze, laughter, conversations, life. "Come on, Daisy," he said finally. "Let's go home." They walked slowly along the beach, the old fisherman and his faithful companion. Behind them, the sea continued its eternal ebb and flow, guardian of memories and promises. Upon arriving home, Ethan found his family gathered. Sarah, Arthur, Marina, and many others.